Welcome to the number one podcast covering Michigan State basketball. The Final Four is not on the schedule. Join Rod and me, Eric, as we dive deep into the Spartans to get you prepared for every game. Subscribe today for in-depth recruiting updates and fantastic interviews with today's important college basketball personalities like Robbie Hummel.
Thanks for having me. I have listened to your guys' podcast numerous times on drives throughout any Midwestern Big Ten city. So I am big fans of your guys' work.
Jay Billis.
And next time, hey, if anybody in Michigan wants a December tea time, call me. You wimps won't show up, but I'll be there. I'll be there and play in the cold. And Izzo will be in front of the fire with hot chocolate.
Coaches Thomas Kelly.
No problem. Glad to be back, man. Glad to be back.
Mike Garland.
You just can't sit there and trade twos for threes. You can't do it. You're going to lose. Coming down the stretch, you're going to lose.
And more. You won't find better coverage of Spartan hoops than you will get here. For both the casual and hardcore fan, come along as we take you for a green and white ride. Hey everybody, it's Eric alongside Rod, here to discuss MSU's upcoming game against the Wisconsin Badgers in Madison, Wisconsin. Before we begin, some exciting news. I've had a lot of you reach out to me and ask when we would again have show logo apparel available. Well, now we do, but it's only for a limited time. The store is only up for 2 weeks, and it will close on February 5th at 8 p.m. All orders must be in by then. It takes then 2 weeks to process and get shipped to you, so it's about a 4-week turnaround. Everything's being sold at cost, so there's nothing that goes to us. However, we do want you, if you can, send some photos. Once you get some stuff of you wearing the apparel around town, whatever, it'd be really great to kind of post that, just kind of see everyone into that stuff. So not only will this keep Rod out of the post office, his favorite place, since Nudge Printing, or it's actually the Fabricated Customs, will be handle the shipping, but it'll also give you a much bigger variety of products than what we had previously. So we'll still have the t-shirts, we'll still have the hoodies, but we'll also have quarter zip for ladies and men's pullovers, sweatshirts, full zip hoodies, and actually tote. So of all the products I've gotten a Nudge, I can assure you they're all top quality, super comfortable. You'll be very pleased with it, and I think very reasonably priced. You can find the link to find all that stuff at the store at our support page. So that's at tffinots.com/support. There you can get links to leave a few shekels in the tip jar as one-time gifts or on a recurring basis, which would be much appreciated, obviously. You can also get a link to all our great sponsors, Coach Garland's autographed book, and our affiliate links for the Electrolyte Recovery Salt, LMNT, and Podbean podcast. All right. So let's talk about the Badgers as MSU looks to avenge its horrendous showing at home back in December, where they were just absolutely handled by Wisconsin. As Michigan State faces off on Friday night, the Badgers are 15-4 overall, 7-1 in the Big Ten, coming off a 2-point, escape you could call it, against Minnesota in Minneapolis Tuesday night. They're 11th in KenPom, 13th in the net. So they're very much within striking range of a top 4 seed at the NCAA tournament. On offense, they're very good. They're 6th in the nation. It's not very unusual for them because they're very good. They're very efficient. They don't, usually turn the ball over. So this year they're extremely efficient offensively by shooting the ball very well. They're 36.1% from 3, which is just slightly less than what Michigan State's shooting. They're also 70th inside the arc. They're 55th in turnover percentage, which actually for them is very, very poor ball control. But the fact that they do other things, they're shooting better, it helps them at their offensive efficiency line. So they've been top 3 a lot of the previous 3 years in turnover percentage. So this is pretty poor for them as 55. By contrast, Michigan State, what is Michigan State? I think they're are they like the top 60 or so for Michigan State this season?
Yes, Michigan State is, I think, maybe slightly above Wisconsin. I'd have to double check it. I want to say they were 53rd and Wisconsin is 55th, I think.
Right. Yeah, and which is, incredibly good for Michigan State just because the way the teams are always different. So
it's all relative.
It's all relative. So their offensive rebounding, which was really good when Michigan State faced them back in December, has come down a little bit. So they're ranked in the 109th, which is still really good for them. But it may continue going down. Another strength is free throws. They're 82nd in free throw attempts and 15th in free throw percentage at almost 78%. So all those things put together just make them an elite offense from efficiency standpoint, although they may not be super pretty, like in some ways you might expect teams to play. So in defense, they haven't been quite as good. They're 46 overall. They've really done poorly against threes. Teams are shooting almost 36% against them and kind of middle of the pack as far as limiting attempts from outside the arc. They're not great at getting at limiting twos at success. They're 190th in twos. They're 158th in creating turnovers. But a lot of that is just that dead ball because they have very low steal percentage of 191st in steals. So they're really, really good, though. When they get you to miss, they clean it up. And so they're 7th nationally in defensive rebounding. So that helps their defensive stats a lot. And so, not surprisingly, also this year, they are a very slow-paced team. They're 327th overall, 345th in length of offensive possession. But opponents are playing a little faster than average. They're playing 127th in length of opponent possession. So that's the fastest people played against them for a few years now. And then I guess the last thing, which I think was the case, was it last year or the year before? They have incredible free throw defense. And so, so teams are not shooting free throws very well against them for some reason.
Yeah, that's true. And they're also, though I didn't mention it, they're not terrible, but they're not quite as good as they used to be in terms of avoiding fouls. If you remember, people used to scream, and rightly so, about the way Bo Ryan coached his teams defensively because they would never get called for fouls, but they were one of the most physical teams you'd play because all the activity was below the waist. They're very smart about it. It was stuff that their physical contact didn't tend to draw the attention of officials who are looking higher. That's been sort of legislated out of the game a little bit.
Yeah.
And I think it's also just, I think Greg Gard's a very good coach. He's not Bo Ryan. He was on Bo Ryan's staff, but he's not Bo Ryan. So I think it's a combination of those two things. Look, this is, you can't deny the fact that they've had a very good season to date. They're very much in competition for a top 4 seed. In fact, if it were today, I'd just about bet the house they'd get it because the metric systems like them.
The record's good.
Winning. Their record is very good. Yeah, it all lines up. But I got to tell you, I'm a believer in Wisconsin as a good team. I'm not necessarily a believer in them as one of the 2 best teams in this conference. Now, we'll see. They may end up with one of the 2 best records. It's entirely possible. But I think this is for a few reasons. I'll start on the offensive end. When they are elite offensively, this is the formula, what you're seeing. We've seen them in some recent seasons kind of go against type a bit, but they're not this year, with one exception, which I'll talk about. They're shooting the ball pretty damn well. It's funny. I looked back at our show notes for the preview for the first game, and they were right about just slightly below where MSU was coming into that game from 3. They are still just slightly below where MSU is from 3. Both teams have gone up like 6-7%.
Gotten better,
since early December. So they've improved there, which is a big deal. If you remember that first game, that's really where the renaissance started for Wisconsin. It took MSU until the next game, the Nebraska game, to really catch fire. But Wisconsin killed MSU from 3.
Yeah.
Crowell went 4 for 4. I think Storr hit 3 or 4 threes. It was guys who back then were not shooting well, and they just delivered. So the team has gotten better there. The turnovers, as you said, they're not as good as they normally are. This is their worst season in several years in that regard. But let's be honest, 55th in the country is still pretty damn good.
Yeah. They're not doing double-digit turnovers, right? I mean, they're still usually
when you shoot the ball and you take care of it at that level, you're going to be a very efficient offensive team.
Right.
The offensive rebounding was an outlier before the December game because it was crazy good for them. This is a program that historically just doesn't even bother trying. Their whole thing has always been about emphasizing floor balance. Getting their defense set, not letting you get into transition. And they don't care about offensive rebounding because they figure with the way they take care of the ball, they're going to get enough shots up to win. They don't need extra shots via offensive rebounding. That's the theory. And it's been pretty good because most years, certainly the vast majority of the seasons under Ryan, and, often enough under Gard, they've had very efficient offenses. But the difference between them, say, a team in the 20s offensively or 30s, and what they are this year is that they're also shooting the ball well. And that the offensive rebounding, even with the downtick lately, is still, 109th is not a disaster area. Certainly not for them. Now, I do think the trend has been in a negative direction, and they're in the Big Ten, which is a conference tends to emphasize rebounding generally. So I will not be surprised if that ranking continues to decline a bit. But, they're still good enough. They've got some guys, Crowell and Wall in particular, that can hurt you. So that's a deal offensively. I think the question is, can the shooting hold up where it is? If it does, they're going to continue to be an elite offensive team from an efficiency point of view. Defensively, though, is where I think there are problems. They don't guard either the 3 or the 2 particularly well. And the problem with the 3 percentage, they're giving up 36%. That's a high number.
Yeah.
And they're not holding down opponent attempts, as you mentioned. They're also not, as I said, they're not the same kind of team as they historically have been over the last generation in terms of avoiding fouling. Now they're riding that luck train, as you talked about, with opponent free throw percentage, but that's purely luck.
Yeah.
You don't have any control over that. So the thing you care about more is how often are you fouling, and they're kind of mediocre in that area. The only thing that's saving their bacon, that's making them even the 46th best defensive team, is that elite defensive rebounding. And that, again, is a Wisconsin program staple. It's something they always do. They're doing it again this year at an extremely high level. So if they generate a miss, you're not getting second chances. So that's the key there. But teams are hitting a lot of shots. So when I see those kind of issues popping up defensively, I do wonder. And I watched a lot of the game against Minnesota. They deserved to lose that game. They were up 15. It was kind of a similar game in some ways to the MSU at Maryland game in terms of the flow of it. Like Wisconsin had a 15-point lead in the first half, and then they gave it all up. Minnesota led the game late and just couldn't close. Had opportunities and just couldn't close it. I wasn't super impressed with Wisconsin in that game. As we know, Minnesota is a tough team. They're a gritty team, but I think even on the road, you probably, if you're truly a Big Ten title contender, you aspire to more than a one possession win. And that's not the end of the world. I mean, teams can lose games, right? Even good teams lose games.
Sure.
But Wisconsin was coming off a loss at Penn State where they were really bad. And so that's 2 straight games against teams that, for better or for worse, are perceived to be near the bottom of the conference. And I think fairly.
Yeah.
And they haven't looked good. So is that just a momentary blip? They had a weird few days and now they're ready to bounce back? I don't know. But I do think that defensive performance is something to watch. That is a vulnerability. And it's clear they're not stopping anybody at anything. Teams are killing them from 3. They're hurting them inside the arc. So, basically they got to hope you miss and then they'll get a rebound. So that helps it from being a Michigan kind of disaster or Iowa. But that is not a formula for big time success. You can be a good team playing that way. I don't think you can be a great team. And so we'll see if they can find ways to improve or if this becomes an issue as we start getting into the second half of Big Ten season and the postseason.
Yeah, and I think, a lot of times you just have to look at what teams on the splits, home and away. They're such different teams, it seems like right now in the Big Ten, especially when you have a lot of teams that are all kind of the same and all jumbled up. The difference, home court is a huge advantage. And so, maybe we'll see what Wisconsin looks like coming back. It's one of those games where would you like Wisconsin losing that game and then coming back to Colson, or would you rather have them just squeak out a win? And, I don't know what's a better situation for Michigan State to face them.
I wasn't bothered by the outcome. I think either, you can make an argument that psychologically it's a little better for Michigan State because they played, I'm not going to say poorly, but they didn't play great.
Yeah.
But yet they won, so you can start to fool yourself a little bit. But I think it's marginal. I think for me, the bigger thing is, where's the trend line in terms of how they're playing? Let's remember, this team had a bad stretch at the beginning of the non-conference. They lost a bunch of games, and some very unimpressively. When we previewed the first game, we were at a point in the season where I think it was part of our discussion. Okay, which is the real Wisconsin team? The team that had played
right.
better of late at that point, or the team that in early mid-November got smoked a couple times? And I think that's there's variance in terms of what this team can be. If they happen to have a night where they're just not shooting particularly well, they could be in trouble.
Yeah.
Because typically the defense is going to be the more consistent area of your play. So if you're not a great defensive team, it could happen, but it's unlikely that that's going to bail you out on a night where shots aren't falling. And look, even for good shooting teams, which they are, there are nights when shots don't fall.
Sure.
We saw that last for about 3 weeks for Michigan State, right?
Yeah.
So, and they are a good shooting team. Definitively now. That's what the numbers tell you. So if your eyes don't. But Wisconsin, it's very similar. If you tell me that Michigan State goes into this game at the Kohl Center and they shoot 25% from three and 38% overall from the floor, I'm not going to find that totally shocking. It can happen.
Yeah.
So you just don't know. You mentioned, I want one quick comment about the home road split. I believe that to date, and I don't know if this number's been updated through the last couple days, probably hasn't, but home teams winning, the percentage of home teams winning has been significantly higher, like 12, 13% higher than the next highest win rate over the last 5 years. So I want to say it's in like the mid 70s. And the next highest rate, I think, is like 65%.
Oh, yeah.
At home. So you would expect that to fall. It could remain an outlier, but you would expect that to come back to earth at least a little bit. And, there have been years I think there was a year within the last 5, if my memory is correct.
The COVID year was the year where all the away teams kept winning.
Was it 59%? Something like that.
Yeah, it was something crazy like that. Yeah.
Crazy low rate. So it can go the other way too. Now that one we have an obvious explanation to point to, right? But it can happen for other reasons, just as one of those weird things.
Yeah.
And we just don't know. But I would expect, and the other thing too is I haven't done any kind of deep dive. It may be because here's the truth is I think we've got less depth in terms of really quality Big Ten teams than we've had in a while.
I agree.
Like we have a group down at the bottom, 4 or 5 teams that at least maybe 6, that anybody above that should look at home or away as, this is a game we ought to get. And it could be that the schedule in the first half has just kind of played out in a way that's been, advantageous to home teams winning.
Sure.
And that we might have, better teams going on the road in the second half in winnable situations. That could contribute to it too.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't know. Like I said, I haven't done that kind of analysis, and I'm not going to because that's way too much work. But it's worth a thought.
Yeah, we're a third of the way through the season. And, Iowa's doing everything they can to try and help those home away teams, get victories like Michigan. And now tonight was Maryland went in there and beat the Hawkeyes.
They won in Iowa City. I haven't been able to watch it. Wow.
Yeah, Jameer Young hit a layup when it was with a second left.
It's important. It's important for Maryland. I mean, they got to find ways. But Iowa's. It's been a long time since they've seen this.
Well, last year Maryland couldn't win on the road, and they won everything at home. And this year they've won a couple on the road, and they've lost a couple at home now. So, All right, well, let's move on to the lineups for the Badgers. This is brought to you by the Brothers at Just Two Gutters, sponsoring the player that Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter, which you'll announce in a little bit. Just as a reminder to the Brothers at Just Two Gutters, they just do gutters. They're located in both the west side of the state and the east side of the state. Anytime you need a job, I have people email me semi-frequently thanking us for recommending the Brothers. They do a really great job. They clean out your gutters. They replace them. They'll fix them up, repair them, whatever you need done. They can put in heated gutters, leaf guards, all that stuff that is not very glamorous, but that's all they do, and they do it really well. They don't just work in residential. They can also do commercial stuff. And if you're the type of person who doesn't want to get on a ladder like me, to clean out your gutters or to fix them up, they'll come and do all that, and they get you good pricing too. So 10% off if you mention Final Four when you get your estimate. You can find ways to that on a support page like I mentioned before, just at tffinots.com/support. And there you can find the link to either for the Metro Detroit area or the Grand Rapids area to get your estimate. All right, so we'll begin with the starters. Chucky Hepburn, 6'1", junior guard. He was a guy who there was maybe rumors that he was going to transfer. He ended up sticking around last year. And he's averaging 7.6 points a game on 38, 28, and 73 shooting, but a 3-to-1 assist-to-turnover ratio. So that is where he does really well, and pretty good defender too.
Yeah, reasonably okay. Yeah, it's funny because he has shot better than this in his career, and I can imagine Wisconsin fans saying, being very disappointed with the way he's played. And he took a lot of heat last year for some reason. I couldn't quite figure it out. Because he was very good. Yeah, maybe. But he was very good, I thought, especially down the stretch.
Yeah.
And he seemed to take a lot of the blame for them being an NIT team. I didn't think it was fair. And that's why I wasn't surprised to hear he was thinking about going in the portal. But he didn't. He came back. And look, Wisconsin has had the same 5 starters for all 19 games they've played this year. That's really, really important, especially for a team like them that's very system-driven. They're going to play the way they want to play, and they're not capable of playing any other way, really. You're typically at your best with that kind of approach when you've got guys with a lot of experience, but maybe just as importantly, a lot of cohesion playing together. And that's particularly true of their point guard. And I think, we're used to point guards from Wisconsin, guards in general, having good assist-turnover ratios. So that's not surprising. But I think even with the shooting being subpar, first of all, he's a guy that even with those shooting numbers, are you going to be shocked if he puts up a 3 for 5 on Friday? No. Right, he's capable of doing that.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the results haven't been good, I don't think you're going to play off him and just let him shoot. And I think that just his presence, giving them a veteran, a guy who knows how to play and how to play the way Wisconsin wants to, is very, very important. And I'll tell you this, if they didn't have him, they'd be in real, real trouble, in my opinion, because they've got a backup we'll talk about in a minute. When we turn to the reserves, but they don't have anybody who's anywhere close to his level.
Yeah.
So it's not a situation like, at the start of the season where Michigan State said, well, if AJ got hurt for a few games, Jeremy Fears and Trey Holloman could have handled it. Mm-hmm. Might not have been quite the same, but it would have been pretty good. Wisconsin is not there. And if they'd had to go into the season, I suspect if they'd lost him, they probably would have gone and tried to find someone. But that's a counterfactual. We'll never know the answer. I just know that I think he's more important than even the stats suggest. Everything's down, the scoring's down, everything's down for him, but I still think he matters.
Well, in offensive, they're playing really well, right? So you suspect that he's giving him opportunities, better shots, because he penetrates a little bit.
And look, Wisconsin they never have been a point guard driven team the way Michigan State is. Right. Their system is different. The swing offense, or the derivatives of it that they run now, I don't think it's a pure swing anymore. It's a variant of the old motion game. And that is not a point guard driven offense. So those kind of teams, I remember Bob Knight's Indiana teams. The guy who was nominally their point guard, I'm not talking about Isaiah, but other years, wasn't necessarily a super high assist guy. They tend to spread those around. And Wisconsin does too. But you still want a guy in big moments, like last night in a close game against Minnesota. You want a guy that knows what they're doing, can get you into your offense, can settle things down, make sure that you're getting the right opportunities out of your possession. And Hepburn does that.
So moving on to Max Klesmit, 6'4" junior. He's a key reserve last year. He's now the starter, averaging 10 points a game on 49, 43, and 89 shooting.
Yeah, he's elevated his game, and he's had some big scoring games lately too. Definitely a portal success story. But, that's the thing. When people, another one of these discussions today, which I can't wait to talk to Coach Mike Garland about after this game.
Oh,
just
yeah.
Spoiler alert. But people think it's just, the portal. That's it. No. If you look at Wisconsin, they're a very good example of this. The guys they've added over the last 2 years, and they haven't added a ton, but Klesmit's one. Their backup point guard, Kamari McGee, is another. The guys that they've added, both of those kids, are Wisconsin guys. So they were coming home, and presumably Greg Gard knew something about them.
Yeah.
He wasn't blind. Now, A.J. Store's a different story, but I think that Klesmit, it's a really good advertisement for smart use of the portal. You get a guy that you know something about, as I'm assuming that they did, and you know that he can play in your system. It's particularly important for a program like Wisconsin because it's the furthest thing from a roll the balls out and see what happens kind of thing, right?
Right.
Like you have to get yourself attuned to playing the way that they want to play. And that's not an easy thing to do. And so it means they've got to be really smart about portal guys. And that's a hard thing to do when you're in the portal, because we know that those recruitments tend to be very, very accelerated. It's not like recruiting high school kids. So, there are players in the state of Wisconsin that Wisconsin really hasn't gone after particularly hard because they just didn't perceive there was a fit. So they care about that, maybe more than most places. Bring it back around to Klesmit. They felt he was a fit. I think he's proven to be that. He was a good reserve last year. He has really elevated his game. He's shooting the ball lights out. I think he's their most versatile perimeter defender. He's tough physically, good size at 6'4". You really can't ask for much more.
Then we'll go to A.J. Store, 6'5", sophomore transfer from St. John's. So he's the one you could say he's a great case for how great the portal is. He leads the team in scoring at 15.3 points a game on 44, 31, 84 shooting. Also pulls down a little over 3.5 rebounds a game.
He really hurt Michigan State, and he hit a bunch of threes, which is not something he typically does. That 3-point percentage, if he gets that dialed in, it's only a sophomore. So if he gets that dialed in over the next couple of years, look out. But he's so good using his size and strength combined with his athleticism that it's almost like we're used to seeing Wisconsin players who use angles well, and they're smart and they're strong, but we're not used to seeing guys who can play that way, but also combine it with pretty good athleticism. He's not Cohen Carr, but he's a very good athlete. That's what they usually don't have.
Right.
They've usually got guys like Klesmit, who's not a terrible athlete, but he's not going to have any wow moments. Storr can occasionally give you those, and yet he plays exactly the way they want to play. He doesn't ever do things, not when I've seen him at least, that get way outside of that.
Yeah.
He's also good enough that occasionally he can give them, and they don't do this a lot, but he can occasionally give them a transition boost that they don't typically have. So great addition. And this one, look, credit to them for their scouting, because he was a St. John's kid. I can't remember where he's from. He might be from the Midwest, actually. But regardless of where he came from, he's proven to be. I think he's as good as any portal transfer in the league. There are guys that might have a little higher scoring average, but when you wrap everything up together, he's from Illinois originally, so he is a Midwest kid. So I'm guessing
may have known him at some level.
Yeah, what was fooling me is he played his prep ball in Arizona and then at IMG.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
But it makes more sense now. So again, I'm going to guess, much like pretty much everybody Michigan State's added ever as a transfer, except for Tyson Walker and Ben Carter, they've been guys who either they recruited in high school, Joey Hauser, Mike Chappelle, or they were guys that they knew about because they were Midwest kids. They had seen some of them when they were out recruiting when those guys were in high school, et cetera. I think that's really important. It's not surprising. That's what Wisconsin does. But regardless, Storr has given them, it's an obvious statement, but it also happens to be a true one. You want to look at the single biggest difference down to one guy between an NIT team last year and a team that's still leading the Big Ten at this point in the season as we come up on the halfway mark. It's adding A.J. Storr. Everybody else is back.
Sure. Well, and then you can also look and say, well, the year before that, the NIT, or they had Johnny Davis, right? And so they're
right
again,
right.
You know, right, that you lose that athletic ability, and you have now a team that struggles to get in the tournament.
Here's the thing. I think Storr, this is just my opinion. People can differ with this. I think Storr is actually maybe a little better athlete than Davis, and I think he even plays more of a seamless style of game into Wisconsin. I mean, Davis did some of the bully ball stuff, using your size inside the arc to get yourself in a good position to make a shot. He did some of that kind of stuff, but I thought Davis, what made him great was his shooting ability, and that's something A.J. Storr doesn't have. But he was, in terms of style of play, I don't think he was a terrible fit for what they did. But A.J. Storr, I just look at him and I think this is what a turbo Wisconsin player looks like. That's just how it strikes me. Very impressed with him.
We'll go to the 4 then, and to Malik Hall's counterpart, Tyler Wall, 6'8", fifth-year player. So he's been healthy this year, and he's been banged up a lot the last couple of years. The last 2 years, actually, when Michigan State's played in Madison, he has not played, and so that may have contributed a little bit to the fact that Michigan State won both times in Madison. He's averaging 11.7 points a game and 5.5 rebounds a game. Shoots 56, 33, and 70, although the 33%, he's only taken 6 threes this year. And gets a lot of free throws too, so he gets 4.5 free throws a game.
Yeah, look, I've said this maybe every time we've ever talked about him on this podcast, which, given that he's in his 5th year, has been several times. And it's a similar thing to what I used to say about Ethan Happ, although they're not entirely the same player, they're roughly similar. If he ever developed a shooting touch from the perimeter, you'd be talking about a lock first-team All-Big Ten player. Instead, you've got just a very good player that allows you to win games because of everything he does. He's also very, very good defensively. When down the stretch last night against Minnesota, there were possessions where they got him the ball and just let him go to work in the post. And he's going up against Dawson Garcia, who's got probably 3 inches on him and probably a little bit of weight too. And Wall just patiently moved him until he got to the spot he wanted to be in. He did it to Payne too, who's even bigger. He's an impressive player because he makes winning plays, much like the best Wisconsin players. He doesn't tend to do a lot of things that are outside what he normally does and what they need him to do. You talk about the 3-point shooting. He's attempted 6. That's about a third of an attempt per game. That's smart because it's not a strength.
Yeah.
You don't see him trying constantly to face people up 15 feet from the basket and just take them off the dribble. What you will see is him get the ball 15 feet from the basket and try to back a guy down patiently and work himself into a spot where he feels comfortable. That's smart basketball, and that's kind of the Wisconsin way. They typically have guys like this, and he's the one they've got now, and he's a tough matchup.
And finally, at the 5, Stephen Kroll, 7-foot senior, having a really good year. He's finally sort of figured things out, it feels like. He's averaging 11.7 points a game and 7.5 rebounds a game, shooting 58, 52, and 73. As anyone who remembers that miserable game in December, Michigan State's strategy was clearly to just let him shoot, and he did. He made those threes early and really got that Wisconsin rolling to start the game.
Now, what's interesting is they've played 7 games since Michigan State. He hit 4 threes in that Michigan State game.
Mm-hmm.
He's hit 4 more total in the other 7 games. So he doesn't take a lot of them, but that percentage sure looks nice.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, especially after the first game, you think Michigan State's going to guard him? Yeah.
Well, I'm sure everyone after that game, too, guarded him.
Right. You have to. But again, his strength is not that. His strength is using his size, using his strength and his patience to get himself into good positions down low. He's also a good passer, as is Wall. That's, again, typical. I was talking about earlier Wisconsin's offensive approach, and it usually involves, more often than not, their bigs are at least good passers, and sometimes, like with Ethan Happ, they're great. These guys are good. And he's been a good rebounder. He and Wall have also combined, as we talked about, to give them more offensive rebounding than they're used to having. Now, again, it's been declining, but it's still, those are guys you have to worry about. You can't give this team second chances.
All right, so who would you, in those starting 5, say Michigan State needs to keep in the gutter?
Storr.
Yeah.
Storr, and that's an easy pick because
choice,
he's their leading scorer, but I just think he's the guy who both plays the way they want to play and is their most dynamic player.
Yeah.
So he will play the way that they want to play, but he'll also give them some things they don't normally get and they don't get from anybody else. And I think he played really well against Michigan State in the first game.
Yeah. So, yeah, kind of the obvious choice. We'll move on then to reserves. We'll begin with John Blackwell. He was a player, Brother Rice. He's averaging 8.7 points a game and 3.4 rebounds a game in about 18 minutes, shooting 46, 50, and 84.
I hope I have reason to ask this question on Friday night after a Michigan State victory, and we're not talking about him really helping kill MSU, but I would be very interested to ask Mike Garland if he had any take on Blackwell's recruitment. Blackwell was a sub 100 guy nationally.
Mm-hmm.
He was part of a good Brother Rice team that had a couple of other D1 guys that never really broke through and got it done. And you could make an argument by the time he was a senior, he might have been their best player, but there are people who differ with that too. He committed very early. I want to say he committed in his junior year. So I think Coach Garland was still part of the program. And I'd be curious to know if he's got any thoughts on that. And I'm not saying that with any kind of critique of Michigan State, because God's honest truth is this is one where you tip your hat to Wisconsin for seeing it early.
Yeah, right.
And they've done that with some Michigan kids in recent years and not had it work out,
Mm-hmm.
But this one it did. And they got him early. Neither Michigan nor Michigan State had offered, and I don't think they would have until at the earliest, maybe the summer before his senior year. He was the kind of guy who, if you look at his profile, he's the kind of player that's a later add to a class for schools like that recruit the way Michigan State and Michigan do. So I don't know. Look, I don't know enough about the kid. His dad played at Illinois and was a very good player. The older among our listeners will remember the name Glenn Blackwell, who was a great guard for the Illini in the I want to say early to mid 80s. So he's got great pedigree. but he was a good player in high school, not an obvious star, but he has been sensational as a freshman. He has done everything you could ever want a freshman guard in that program to do. He has shot the ball exceptionally well. He's a better athlete than they often have in the backcourt, and he looks like he can defend a little bit too. So, great addition. I think a steal, calling him a steal would be fair. And I think he's going to be a key part of what they do, assuming that, the modern era doesn't take him away for some reason for a long time to come, because he's just in his first year.
All right, so next reserve is Connor Season, 6'4" sophomore. Was really good last year, kind of came on probably midway through the season or a third of the way through the season last year for Wisconsin. He averages 3.2 points a game on 39, 31, 83 shooting. He definitely shot better last year. He was that was really very impressive when he coming in last season. Kind of got out of nowhere.
Yeah, and this was a team that didn't shoot the ball incredibly well last year from deep.
Right.
But he did. He was a big part of whatever success they did have. He battled injuries over the offseason, and then, although he's played in every game, I think from what I've read and what I've seen, it's just been a very hard process for him to find his rhythm. And, and Klesmit's improved, Storr arrived, Blackwell's on the team now. So, you're in a situation where your role is going to dry up. And keep in mind, the suspect part of his game as a freshman was a defensive end. So if the shots aren't falling, well, what are you getting?
Yeah.
His shooting has gotten better. I mean, when MSU saw them the first time, I want to say it might have been in the high teens. It's now getting, as Izzo might say, he's beginning to join the human race from three, but it's not nearly where he was a year ago. That's for sure. But again, just like with, somebody like Hepburn, if Connor Season has the ball just outside the arc, are you letting him shoot it without trying to contest it? I don't think so.
Yeah, that's his mistake. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so moving on to appropriately named 6'11" freshman from Minnesota, Nolan Winter. He looks to be next up on the sort of the assembly line of bigs at Wisconsin. 2.8 points a game, 1.9 rebounds a game in 10 minutes, shoots 48, 26, and 63.
Yeah, and this is looking like the next in a long, long, long line of guys just like this. We'll see if the three-point shooting improves as he goes. There's certainly every reason to believe that's possible, because that frequently does happen with young players. But even if it doesn't, he could have more gradual improvement and still aspire to have a career like, say, Stephen Kroll has had.
Yeah.
But they got a knack for this. They got a knack for big men who could shoot, who can pass it, who over time can get stronger and be taught to develop their post games. And it just happens over and over and over. And the worst part of it, if you're Ben Johnson, coach at Minnesota, is a disproportionate number of these guys come from the state of Minnesota, as does Winter. Wall is a Minnesota kid. I have to double check. I think Kroll may be. I mean, they have Bo Ryan and on to Greg Gard have made an absolute killing. And this is just to go on this tangent for the 900th time, because I know I've done it a lot. The single most important thing that Ben Johnson could do, he doesn't have to get the McDonald's All-Americans from that state. It's great if he does, occasionally at least, but he doesn't have to. He's got to get the guys who've been going to Wisconsin.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's just that simple.
Next would be Carter Gilmore, 6'7" junior, plays about 10 minutes a game, averages 2.1 points a game on 65, 20, and 83 shooting.
To call him not exactly a finesse player is putting it mildly, but his role is important, though, because they'll use him to spell Wall. They could also use him at the 5 a little bit if they want to go small, but I don't think they do that very much, especially since Winter has proven that he's worthy of trust.
Yeah.
But he just comes in and plays hard, plays physically. In the Minnesota game, he made a couple of hustle plays. that might not look like big deals, but I think they helped Wisconsin when they were struggling to hold Minnesota off. Again, Wisconsin frequently has these kind of guys, and he's the latest example. He's not going to wow you with anything he does skill-wise, but he's going to throw his body around, and he's a fairly big body, and he'll play very, very hard.
And finally, Kamari McGee, a 6-foot junior, backup point guard, averaging 7 minutes a game, scoring about 1.4 points a game on 47, 33, and 73 shooting.
Yeah, it's very low volume shooting. I think his assist to turnover numbers like 7 assists, 6 turnovers. So they don't ask him to do very much. He's basically getting approximately, say, 1 3 to 4 minute turn each half to give Hepburn a blow. But, this is it. Like on paper, he makes sense because he's very quick. And you think, well, that can give them something. But if you can't really do anything with it, it doesn't matter so much. He's essentially a placeholder. And honestly, if anything happened to Hepburn and he went down, I suspect they'd probably move Klesmet to the point rather than insert Lance.
Other solutions.
Because I just don't think Lance has proven to be, or McGee, has proven to be a high enough level player. But he plays. He's consistently, 7-8 minutes a night.
All right, we'll move on to our squeegee squad of Grand Rapids, player at Michigan State who cleans the glass the best. You're on a bit of a heater right now. You've won 3 in a row, I think. And actually, you get to pick first, too. So why don't you go ahead and tell us who you're taking?
Malik Hall's been very good to me.
He has been.
Yeah. Sorry, Malik. I am going with Mady Sissoko. I don't think Wisconsin. Now, that could be dangerous because I was about to say I don't think Wisconsin will put him in the kind of foul trouble that Maryland was able to.
Right.
But that's also not a crazy thought. So we'll have to see, but I'm going with Mady.
Well, and I think it makes sense. I mean, right now it's pretty much 1-2 about every game, and so I'm going to have to just go with Malik Hall until we see signs otherwise. So again, the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids do great work. They came out to my house yesterday, and it was pretty cold weather. I was surprised. We've never had our windows cleaned before. You don't realize how dirty things are until you've had them cleaned. And the one thing we really notice in it is our screens. You don't notice a little dirt or whatever that kind of builds up in those screens. And so, like, we can see out the kitchen window a lot better than before. And again, those are just gradual things you don't notice.
It's like going from standard definition to high definition, right?
It is. It's like when you watch the old Lions clips from the, Barry Sanders, like, how could I have watched this football?
Right.
Right. I can't even see his face hardly or whatever. Right now, you can see like every pimple or mole on these guys. So anyway, they did a great job. I mean, they're out of our house for like 6 or 7 hours. It was very thorough, inside, outside the windows. I was very dumb because I thought, it's gonna be they're gonna be up in ladders because it's kind of raining. And they just did almost all of the work from inside. They just kind of flipped the windows down. I didn't even know my windows flipped down. So it shows you how thoroughly we clean our windows. So super nice people, great pricing, super thorough. I mean, they were phenomenal. So they did a great job. So I'd highly recommend the Squeegee Squad of Grand Rapids. You can find the way to contact them to get a free estimate, 15% off. You mentioned Rebound when you get the estimate, and you can find that in the support page below, sponsoring our Who Cleans the Glass Best. And I've got to start picking up the pace here because I had a huge lead and I've squandered it. It's down to 3-3 now. So, all right. So let's move on to 5 Keys to the Game, brought to you by Nudge Printing. And this is a reminder too that Nudge Printing is sponsoring a trivia question for a free hoodie. Everybody who does this, who enters, gets a $5 gift card. So if you did the other trivia question, doesn't matter. You can enter this one. You get a $5 gift card at a minimum for Nudge Printing, which you could use if you want to go to the store and get some logo apparel. So that's a good way of doing stuff too. So the trivia question, and I don't know if you know the answer to this one, Rod, but it's March 4th, 2000. Bettine Cleaves in a 114-63 victory over a Big Ten team had set the Big Ten and Michigan State single game assist record at 20. So the trivia question is, which team was that? And we'll announce that after the Michigan game. So
that's good.
Yeah. So anyway, so you've got about the Michigan game is on Tuesday. So again, the Michigan game is when we will announce the winner. So get your entries in now. And again, you can find that entry at the contest page on our website. So you go to the tiffknots.com, and then there's contests. Or you can just go to nudgeprinting.com/tiffknots, and it will be there as well. And it goes great, again, great apparel at Nudge Printing. So 5 keys of the game. The first key of the game is inside out. Michigan State hit a lot of 2s against Wisconsin the first game, but not great from outside. So this has been sort of the formula really for Michigan State being more effective offensively the last few games. And this run, we'll call it.
It looked like a not bad performance from 3 by the levels that we'd been seeing at that time, because they were 6 for 19.
Like, whoa, great.
So whatever, 30, whatever, 31%, 30%. But it was not good. And there were good looks, as I recall. And that was part of what made it a frustrating game. It was that, and the fact that Michigan State simply could not stop Wisconsin, particularly from 3, but generally on offense. For MSU offensively, look, I'm sure everybody's tired of hearing me say it, but it's true for almost any team. It's especially true for this Michigan State team. Offensive balance is critical. They've got to get the ball inside and score points in the paint. One, because those are higher quality shots generally, easier shots, I should say. You're closer to the rim, right? You should convert at a higher level. Almost every team does. But secondly, because it forces a defense to loosen up.
Yeah. And
means that you should in turn be able to get higher quality 3 shots. Now, for most of the season, what that has meant is the guards, particularly AJ and Tyson, have to get into the lane and to the rim. They got to convert inside. Lately, I think we've seen hints of, I'm hardly going to call it a dominant post game, but of a real viable post game. Malik Hall has been very, very good for a while now, and has been good for, I'd say, a couple post-ups a game, at least, where he's just backing somebody down on the blocks, and he goes to work. In the last game, and I don't even know if we talked about it, there was a sequence. Jackson Kohler didn't play a lot against Maryland, but he had, for his first, I believe it was his first bucket from the floor this season.
Yeah, nice little reverse.
In what, 3 games? It was a beautiful spin move and reverse. And that's a move we saw him make last year, but he did have issues at times finishing.
Yeah.
And so we need to see more, but Maryland was a really physical team. So to make that play against that defense, and a very good defensive team, good stuff. And I think that, it remains to be seen, as I've preached basically since the season started and we knew Jackson was injured, it remains to be seen if he can expand his playing time, because that's going to come down to the way he guards and to some extent the way he rebounds. But if he can, that could also give a little bit of a boost. But look, if you get 3 pure post-up baskets in a game versus some games earlier in the season where Michigan State got essentially nothing out of that part of the game, and then maybe add in the occasional post basket from Mahdi and Carson, who are capable of occasionally hitting those plays. I can't say I'm a big fan of a heavy diet of it, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah.
You're starting to get that production at least a little bit in other ways, which helps, because it just adds another element teams have got to worry about. Like, I'm going to be interested. Do we start seeing teams doubling Malik? I don't know.
I mean, I imagine that's coming. And as far as Kohler, he's only played, 2 minutes, I think, 2 straight games or something like that.
Yeah.
Early indications, I mean, it's been very, very brief. I'm pretty impressed with how he's moving around and how he's defending and rebounding so far.
I am too. Good early indications, but they're brief.
Yes, they're very brief. But I think, if people want to see more of him, and I get it, but I think, with the foot injury, it's going to be a little while before you get him back to double digits. I think probably not till the homestand, maybe against Michigan, you'll see him play a little bit more minutes, but he'll probably get a turn at least in this game at some point.
Yeah.
So moving on to the second key to the game, it's Malik Wall, or is that Tyler Hall? So this is the matchups of the fours. It's kind of been a weird sort of, these two have been sort of matched up against each other, but they really haven't. Because like I mentioned, Wall was not present the last 2 years at Madison. And this game, this year, Malik was really sick. And so he was not himself. And so as far as we know, they're both healthy and ready to go. So it'll be interesting to see how this matchup goes.
It's the first time in a while. Yeah, for whatever reason, it just, I think it's been February of 22. So 2 seasons since they entered a game both at full strength. And interestingly, Wall was a starter, Malik was a reserve in that game, but Malik had 12-4, Wall had 11-5. So pretty much a draw statistically. They're both critical guys for their teams, obviously. Both of them are capable of giving them low post production. Both of them are guys who can go get offensive rebounds. That's something Malik does well. Arguably as well as anybody on Michigan State's team, I would say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
They're both versatile defenders, can guard a lot of different kinds of players. I would say, despite the fact that he hasn't had a knockdown shooting season, Malik's over 30% now. And I think he's a little more of a threat than Wall is.
Certainly more attempts.
There, and they both pass him. I mean, Malik has done an outstanding job. His assist-to-turnover ratio is crazy good this year.
Yeah.
And Wall's always been a capable passer. So they're very, very, they've both been in the league 5 years. I mean, they mirror each other. And it's good to see them both healthy. I think if either one of those guys ends up with a decisive edge in this game, that's a big deal for their team. If it's a draw, they cancel each other out. But
yeah, well, and we saw kind of what happened at Northwestern. We had Barnheiser just tore apart that position, that matchup.
Michigan State just does not. I'm not saying it's impossible to win if they don't get a good game from Malik, but the job becomes much tougher.
Yeah. Third key to the game is defensive rebounding. As we mentioned, Wisconsin looked like a really good offensive rebounding team early in the season, mainly just from Wall and Kroll, the ones who were pulling all the boards down. They have sagged off as far as how many offensive rebounds they're getting since they hit the Big Ten, but they're still definitely capable, and Michigan State has shown themselves capable of being exploited on the offensive boards.
Yeah, and that's the thing. If Michigan State were consistent at that end, I'd say, all right, we have a pretty good chance to limit these guys because they're clearly heading in the wrong direction. But, man, we've seen Michigan State just so inconsistent. And, I had this discussion on the Spartan Mag board in recent days, and it's going to be the subject in part of one of my questions for Mike Garland on Friday night.
Mm-hmm.
I maintain the rebounding issue, the consistency issue with this team, as it often is for any team in the modern game when it comes to rebounding, lies primarily not with Michigan State's big men, but with their guards. And that is going to once again be a key in this game. So that means Jaden Akins, it means A.J. Hogard, Tyson Walker sneaking in for an occasional board, Trey Holloman, all hands, Cohen Carr when he's in the game, playing on the wing, all hands on deck.
Yeah.
And you have to be locked in this game to limiting Wisconsin to one shot because they're a good shooting team. It's the same thing Wisconsin will say about Michigan State, but the difference is Wisconsin's got every right to feel great about their odds of limiting MSU to one shot. Michigan State has more questions. And look, here's the other deal. You're probably not going to have a significant turnover advantage. If you have one at all, you feel good about it. But these teams are pretty even when it comes to turnovers. So I'm not expecting there's going to be a significant gap there. So that means if you want to be on equal footing with Wisconsin in terms of the number of shot attempts you're getting, you got to do the job on the boards because you're probably not going to get an advantage on your own offensive boards. That could be the name of this game. If Wisconsin is able to get, 5 extra shots, that can be a difference maker in a game like this, where the two teams have some similarities in terms of their profile. It's significant.
Fourth key to the game is pace. Wisconsin likes to keep it slow, and Michigan State likes to keep things moving a little bit faster. And certainly you saw that in the Maryland game when they get up and run and transition. It makes everything easier, and that's just the way they like to play.
Look, it's two things. I think that, Wisconsin maybe being a little more oriented toward trying to go to the offensive glass than they've typically been means you may be able to get a little more in the way of transition opportunities that way. Maybe that's the case, but fundamentally, what I'm looking for is quick play in the half court. And look, Wisconsin's defensively has had teams playing much quicker than they usually do. Last season, the average length of opponent offensive possession against them was somewhere, I want to say it was somewhere in the 320s.
Yeah.
It was near the bottom. And that's typically what they do. It's not just that they run the clock when they have the ball. It's at the other end. They're going to force you to go down to the last 5 seconds a lot to find a shot. And it might not be a shot you want. We're seeing with this version, they're giving up a lot of makeable shots because people are making them at a decent clip. And they're giving those shots up much quicker than they usually do. I think they're only 128, something like that.
Yeah, in the hundreds versus 300s. 127, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So that means there's an opportunity. And that's incumbent on Michigan State. What that means is Michigan State, its point guard, so A.J. Hogarth primarily, but also Trey Holloman, probably a little bit of Tyson Walker too, need to be very, very proactive and purposeful about getting Michigan State into its offensive sets in the half court quickly, and then making sure those sets are run with a purpose. No get around, dribbleitis, taking 10 seconds off the clock while you wait for everybody to get set and actually get into some movement. Can't happen. Man movement, ball movement has to be there.
And the fifth and final key is the Kohl Center, the dreaded Kohl Center where Michigan State could never beat Bo Ryan.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Listeners, if I told you what is Michigan State's record over the last 6 visits to the Kohl Center, would you be surprised if my answer was 4-2? You should not be, because that is in fact what it is. Now, that hasn't equated to dominance in the series because Wisconsin has managed to win a fair amount over that period at Breslin.
Yeah, right.
So it's still an even series. But two teams with buildings that historically have tended to carry with them a huge home court advantage have not in this series. It just has not worked out that way recently. Now, how much does that mean for this particular individual game? Not a whole hell of a lot. Every season, it's new teams, new season, new game. So I don't take that to mean a ton, except this. Sometimes it's undeniable. There is a psychological effect when you as an individual player have not had success doing something, to bring it around to our region, our state's current obsession, the Detroit Lions. I'm not saying that it means everything, but you cannot tell me that the albatross of failure that has been around this franchise's neck for decades has not at times at least played a little bit of a role in what's happened. I'm not saying it's decisive, but if you're trying to tell me it hasn't mattered at all, I don't believe that. That's what makes what they're doing all the more remarkable, because you got a group of people who have just shrugged at that and said, screw it, that's not us.
Yeah.
But that's hard to do. For this Michigan State team, a lot of these guys have had success at Kohl. Malik Hall, A.J. Hogarth, even Tyson Walker, Jaden Akins, Madi Sissoko. Those guys have been part of winning teams at Kohl. So they do not carry into this game, even though Wisconsin's at the top of the standings. They don't carry into this game the same kind of psychological baggage that, say, the 2005 team did.
Right.
Which was a Final Four team. And probably 9 years out of 10 was good enough to win the Big Ten, but they had the misfortune to be playing in a year where Illinois had the best team of their history. That team lost at Cole. Tight game, but lost. They hadn't had any success. Even like, most of Draymond Green's teams.
Yeah.
Now, he finally did break through, I believe, but earlier in his tenure, his career, Michigan State struggled to win there. That's just how it was. This group does not carry that burden. They shouldn't, at least. So I think what it means in a practical sense is there's no extraneous stuff other than what would come with any road game in the Big Ten against a very good team. Put it this way, there's a lot less of that stuff coming into this game than there's going to be when they visit West Lafayette.
Yeah, right.
Right?
For sure.
And those teams Wisconsin's a game up in the loss column, I'm pretty right now. I don't think many people believe they're actually a better team, but that's you understand the point I'm making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's just a different deal because Michigan State's kids haven't ever experienced success at Mackey, but they have at Cole. So the importance of all of that is simply this, in my opinion. They can go into this game treating it as any other road game against a very competitive opponent. You don't have any of the extra nonsense, and that's okay. That's an okay place to be because then it's about the confidence and the way that you've been playing and, taking care of business as a team. Well, that's what you want it to be.
Okay, and the final thing I just want to mention, I think briefly, is and Izzo mentioned it in his press conference, I think this week at some point, talking about Jeremy Fears. As you may recall, Jeremy Fears on December 23rd, 24th, I think it was like 24th, like at 1 a.m. or something, sustained a gunshot wound to his thigh, had emergency surgery for removal of the bullet. And we came in and talked about that. I reached out to some of my orthopedic associates, Dr. Hamilton, specifically at Corewell Health, who takes care of collegiate, high school, pro athletes. And so, what is sort of the recovery process? And he said, the biggest thing is it depends on what kind of soft tissue injury that he gets. And so if it was whether it's minor, moderate or major damage, if it's minor, then you expect him to get some physical activity within about 4 weeks, full contact, physical contact within about 6, and anywhere from 6 to 8 weeks, you could see him back on the court. And so we hit the 4-week mark I think it would be the 21st of January, which was just last Sunday. And we hear word that he's doing things physically. I mean, he's like working on the treadmill and underwater. I mean, he's doing, he's doing physical activity. So he is putting full weight on that and doing stuff on that leg. So I think that's incredibly encouraging. I know you had mentioned before that if he were to play this, you do somersaults. So we might have to get a video of that if he comes out. But
don't hold your breath.
I'll say right now, because I was commenting the board earlier, but I would be surprised if we don't see Jeremy Fears on the court this season. Now there of course could be setbacks. He may have deficiencies in his explosiveness, his ability to move, or things like that, which you can't know at this point. But my general sort of superficial impression of who he is and like what sort of, everything we sort of you can gather about him seems like the kind of guy who is about as tough as they come and is going to do everything he can to get back on the court. So I would, again, it's all speculation, but I do think there's a reasonable chance we'll see him back in the green and white before the season's out. And I think probably it could be as early as even the Iowa game on the 20th or, maybe the Ohio State the 25th. I mean, it could be a lot sooner than we really, assuming everything goes well, I think we could really see him out there. And so anyway, it's very encouraging, at least everything we've heard so far.
Yeah, hugely encouraging. And I think that, every bit of information we've gotten from Izzo and just what we can see, Jeremy's been off the crutches for, I think, at least a week.
Yeah, just walking around,
and
hobbling
you see
a little
him,
bit.
right. Yeah. You see him moving. That can't be a bad thing. Now,
No.
As you say, there's a lot that we can't know that probably even at this point he can't know, or his physicians can't know, which
Right.
is, okay, is there an impact in terms of his explosiveness? They're totally different injuries, and I don't mean to harp on the comparison, but when we talked to Mike Garland a little while ago, we spent some time around the subject of his book talking about Mateen Cleaves and the injury that he had. And, that was one that's a different injury, totally different situation. One does not, and it's also been, 25 years too. So there are advances in treatment, all of that. But you just can't know what's going to happen in that regard, right? I mean, I'm speaking as a non-physician here, but that's my sense, is things like that are unknowns until they're known.
Yeah.
And so we'll just have to see. And it matters because that athletic ability is a part of what makes Jeremy special. Now, I happen to think that even if that was reduced somewhat, Jeremy Fears has every element, the way Mateen Cleaves did, to remake himself as a player and still be a very, very good point guard. I think he has that potential. So I'm not saying this in the sense of, oh God, we got to worry if he's going to be, the guy that we thought he could be.
Yeah,
I think
right.
he could be that regardless of how that turns out. But obviously you want him to be coming in with his best foot forward.
Mm-hmm.
And I also think this. I think that the timeline that you suggested, late February, and this is just me talking, not Tom Izzo, not Jeremy Fears, and it's their decision. Mine doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
But that to me is about the last stage that you could think seriously about bringing him back.
Yeah.
I
agree.
think if you get into March, yeah, there's a couple of regular season games, I think, in March, and then you have the Big Ten tournament, and then hopefully, presumably, the NCAA tournament. But it's just tough. I mean, I think you want every possible game for him to get his sea legs. And look, the temptation to play him if he's available is going to be difficult to avoid. So that's something. It'll be interesting to me to see how they see it. Going back to Coach Garland's book, and I won't spoil the entirety of it, but I would suggest, and again, if you haven't bought his book yet and you're a listener of this program, what are you waiting for? Because it's fantastic with stories like the one I'm going to allude to here. The story about how Mateen Cleaves handled his rehab to be able to play as a freshman is remarkable and perhaps instructive in this case, because, and Izzo's talked about the similarities between these guys, their mentality, games, the way they think about the game, their approach, their toughness. If that's true down the line, then you're probably going to see Jeremy Fears pushing to do everything he can to get out there.
Yep.
And for Tom Izzo to let him. It'll be interesting to see which way this decision goes. In Cleaves's case, Izzo and his parents eventually consented to him playing. And while Coach Garland would tell you he doesn't become the player he became without having gone through that, I believe him. But I can also tell you, because I remember it, the kid played with a back brace, but because he was a McDonald's All-American and considered maybe the highest profile recruit Michigan State had signed since Magic, the expectations around him were through the roof. And when people saw the way he played that year, again, mostly because he was wearing a back brace, or as
amazing.
Coach Garland
Marco, he
put
can
it,
even play. Yeah.
Coach Garland put it, I think he called it a full body cast.
Yeah.
He didn't play all that well. He didn't play, let's put it this way, he played remarkably for a guy wearing a full body cast. But he didn't play the way that people expected a McDonald's All-American and a program savior to play.
Right.
And so he took a lot of heat. Izzo took a lot of heat. Thankfully, it all worked out. But and that's apart from the physical risk to him, which was the most important thing, you know? So in Jeremy Fears' case, it will be interesting to me to see how they play it out. I would suspect if there is any remote chance, Jeremy Fears is going to push to play. That's my guess. Just seeing the kid,
that's
we
my
talked
impression
to
too.
him, you know.
Yeah.
I think that's how it's going to be. Does Michigan State approach it the same way they did back then? Remains to be seen.
Yeah. Well, and you know, at some level, as long as you're not further injuring something, you know, you're only pretty much worried about most likely just bony injury, and it probably is not any threat of injury at that point, but my guess.
Yeah.
So then it's just a matter of, you know, how can you perform, compete, and, you know, be able to move the way you want to while you're on the floor. That's going to be the limiting point. And they'll know that before he goes on in game situation. So you'll have an idea. They'll know beforehand.
And it's a really good point you make that. And again, I said this, but I'll stress it again. The injuries are different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if there truly is no risk of additional damage, then, you know, that has to be factored into calculus. Then it's just about how much is he helping you?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Can you manage the pain? Can you manage, you know, what you can do? Is that enough to be effective on the court?
Yep.
So which is, again, this is why I believe that we'll see him, barring something happening. We could, you know, theoretically in 2 weeks we could see him. So, I mean, you could even see him sometime in, you know, mid-February, which would be hard to believe, but we'll know probably. I mean, we're going to know beforehand if when he has to practice for at least a week, right?
Sure.
And so we'll know.
Right. Yes.
We'll know probably in a week or two if he's not practicing. Then we're like, it's probably not going to happen this year, but we'll know in a couple weeks, I think. So,
right.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. And just as a reminder, to check out the contest, you can go to tiffnots.com/contests. You can find the link there to enter in for free. You get a $5 gift card to Nudge Printing, which you use whatever you want. You can also go to our online store, and which is open until February 5th, I think is what I said, at 8 p.m. And that will have all the different logo stuff. You can get access to all that. It's again, super comfortable. It's all at cost, so it's relatively well priced. You can get that at Nudge, or actually you can get that at our support page. That's probably the easiest way to get to it. And then also we plan on having Mike Garland, coach the OG, back on after the Wisconsin game. So you should see him afterwards. So make sure you check out that show. And so until next time, the Final Four is on schedule. Oh yeah, go Lions and go green.